Welcome to our live Tuesdays where we're talking about trends and always sharing the information that you need to help your clients better. And today I'm so excited because we have Louise Kursmark and Deb Dib here with me to talk about the power of storytelling in career documents. And Deb, Louise, we've been talking about this for a while, so it's going to be fun for us to continue this conversation and share this information with everyone else. So thank you for joining me here today.
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure.
Yes. So we want to talk about how storytelling is really important and kind of why storytelling is important. And Deb, I'm going to let you share a little bit on that topic while I pull up a visual.
Sure. So I've been a passionate proponent of storytelling for a really, really long time. Kind of started with my personal branding training and realizing that authenticity and the story around people's authenticity is so connective. And if you strategically look at your story and think about what you can do with it in terms of it showing your value while also showing the humanity that you bring to everything you do and giving people more of a connection point than just your job accomplishments. Storytelling becomes a really, really powerful way to, shall we say, promote yourself while not promoting yourself, while connecting with people. And neuroscientifically, there's a huge reason for that. And that is because our brains are wired for storytelling. They really, really are. Crazy as that may sound, and storytelling has been with us since the Stone Age, when people gathered around fires, and that's how they exchanged information and legends, and people learned things. The emotional part of a story is what is the most powerful part of your story, believe it or not. That lights up the brain in more areas than anything else. Facts only light up 2 areas of the brain. Facts surrounded by a story that builds emotion light up 5 areas of the brain, and also brings the ability to remember things far longer. So on a very practical level, storytelling is a great strategy. And on just a human level, it's a lot more fun to hear about things in a story than to see a bulleted list. Would you agree, ladies?
Absolutely.
And most definitely. And the science agrees with you, Deb. And you found this graphic a while ago about people kind of wanting a storytelling format from people's marketing, from brand marketing.
Yes, absolutely. This is something that we're, again, to use that word wired, I don't want to repeat myself, but we're wired to crave stories. We're wired to crave connection. And the more automated and distancing our work lives become, and especially now, we really want that connection. And putting a story together where you narrate it in a way that is absolutely authentic to you, and narrate it strategically, but in your language, using not tons of buzzwords, maybe enough to be able to show that you know the industry or whatever, but doing that drives that emotional engagement that we're looking for. And it also helps everybody who hears it know you better. And it also models great behavior because other people realize that storytelling works well and begin to think about using it and start experimenting with it as well. And it's been shown that when team leaders, CEOs, whatever, adopt storytelling as a business strategy, performance of those companies and of those teams goes up. So it's becoming a business imperative, especially for people like Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, Zuckerberg. They all are using a storytelling approach in their meetings and in kind of their retreats and all of those other things.
Yeah, and this is talking about how 92% of people say they'd rather see a story from a brand in their marketing. And of course, we know that LinkedIn is kind of following suit here because LinkedIn will be rolling out stories just like Instagram and Facebook because those are so popular and they have such a good connection to other individuals. People want to see those stories, especially on Instagram.
Right. And it looks like LinkedIn LinkedIn is always kind of, they may be a leader in certain areas, but when it comes to these social media connection points, they seem to be waiting for Instagram and Facebook to show them it works, and then they'll try it.
Yeah, and that storytelling really is so powerful because it connects, and as you said, it makes that emotional connection. But we also have found in our research that it makes you 22 times more likely to remember the information. Yeah,
That's
so
a lot, right?
yeah, yeah.
I mean,
And that's why you found this term strategic narrative. And I
yeah.
thought that's perfect for what we do, especially some of the ways that you share it, Louise, because it really is strategic in the way that we share it, not just in, kind of the fluff, right?
Exactly. I think that's a really great point. And for those of you who are participating and listening and thinking, gee, I'm not a coach, I'm not a touchy-feely storyteller, that's not what we're talking about in terms of, unless that's your style. I think Deb really hit the nail on the head with the term authenticity. It has to be authentic to you. But I've been using stories in all of my pretty hard-hitting career marketing documents and in my own stuff for a long time, because without the story, what you have is just so dry and generic. The story makes it human and it makes it unique. And that's always what we're looking to do in the things that we write and the things that we help our clients to express.
Yeah, and it gives it context, right, Louise?
Yes, exactly.
Context is so incredibly important, and it's hard to give context without some sort of story. And we know how to do it through car stories anyway. This is just a different version of a car story.
Yeah, and Deb, you came up with this graphic that we use in our storytelling class that really talks about how storytelling is so important in our documents.
Right, exactly. So we've kind of, Louise and Marie and I have kind of come up with this term professional, which is taking professional and adding a personal to it. Which is what we're seeing a lot of now in this COVID world, with everybody being on Zoom in their own homes and people getting to see more about them and the roots of women's hair and men's hair for that matter. And just seeing people's more about their real selves, and that they're still professional, right? But it's also got this personal element that makes them feel more real and more human. And that's very connecting for most people. So we're talking about professional marketing, so to speak, personal marketing, first or third person. It's got all about goals and strategy, but it's got to be also about brand and authenticity and value and impact. You add storytelling or strategic narrative, which sounds a little more powerful, but at its essence, it's still storytelling with a purpose. You add that narrative style, that easier to listen to style, and that personal voice, that authenticity we talked about, and you add in some personal information. We talk about point of view, things like that. And then things you're passionate about and emotional about. And it doesn't have to be anything overt, anything that feels inauthentic. That would be the worst thing to do. The really, truly worst thing to do. But when you add those things into the type of storytelling you're already trained to do with car stories, with the challenge, action, result, impact, and you build a story around it, the story that's around it is the thing that gets people engaged with it and helps them to connect and remember what they connected with, and makes you really stand out, or your client really stand out in ways that most people don't. Because there is something so compelling about a human connection where somebody also says, I want that. I see how that happened, and these other people do it, but I don't see really how they do it, and I don't really know who they are. I get you, and I know you can do it. I'm picking you, and that's what we want.
And also, it attracts the right people to us. I think that's a really important point with regarding storytelling, is when we are authentic and we share information about ourselves or our clients, that attracts the people who find that attractive, right? So it automatically self-selects. Like if you read a profile of a resume writer, career coach, career counselor, and something in that profile that is human and authentic, and a story about how they got into it resonates with you, you already have a connection with that person, and it just is more attractive and inviting than just having a list of qualifications and certifications and professional experiences. So it really makes a big difference in humanizing everything is, especially as it's so virtual.
Yeah, and Louise, you have this example of a LinkedIn profile that we're going to look at shortly, but I just wanted to, so you moved from kind of the theoretical of professional versus professional to an example of a LinkedIn profile. And Deb, you also came up with this, but just this idea that we're switching our LinkedIn profiles, our bios, and even somewhat our resumes from pitch to plot.
Yeah, and I love alliteration. Anybody who knows me knows that. But I also think alliteration is great because it really helps you remember key concepts. And going from pitch to plot really means going from the personal marketing that we all do and do so well, whether we're coaches or writers, and taking that and transforming it into a storytelling conversation. So we're going from basically doing first or third person narratives, introductions, if you will. And it's, when I say 1D or 2D professional, that basically means it's not 3D. It's not around the whole person, their work life, their home life, their values, where they are in the world. So it's only 1D, maybe 2D. It's more about left brain, factual. It pushes value. It gives career history, hopefully strategically and well. If it's through any of us, it is, but it's still very focused on that. It's this pitch to sell the product, which is either us or our client. And it's really built on a strong foundation of facts, accomplishments, et cetera. All things that we know how to get on paper so well, teach our clients to use in interviews so well. But it really, at its essence, is kind of a pitch. Here I am, this is what I can do for you. What do you think? Plot is more about taking all of that and wrapping it into a story. So it becomes more of a conversation. It adds in that 3D, that, work-life world part of people, which is basically that whole person. And stories, the other thing that stories do, which is so cool, is it's one of the few things that work for left and right brain people. Either way, it's not that a left brain person loves it and a right brain person loves it. It works equally well for both. So no matter who you're speaking to, stories resonate. And the value that you're bringing, that return on investment, that impact, wrapped in a story, becomes, again, memorable. As Marie said, 22 times more memorable than were it in a list of bullets, because it ties facts to emotion, the emotion of the story. The facts that you want to get across are represented in that story. And the story can be flexible. You can make it longer. You can make it shorter, depending on who you're speaking to. You can create a whole story about your client's tenure at an organization, or you can create one particular accomplishment. Stories are very flexible, but the main thing is remembering that emotional component in the brain. Facts wrapped in a story, the brain lights up 5 times, 5 different areas. Facts, if you're just saying, this is what I did, and this is how I did it, and blah, 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 boom, done. Only 2 areas that brain light up, and you don't get that 22 times more retention than you do with a story. And you would think it would be the reverse, but it is not.
Yeah. Well, and so let's have a story here. Louise, you are going to share the story about one of your clients and how you worked his story into his LinkedIn profile. And I'll kind of zoom in here and scroll down so that people can see this as we go.
Okay, so I think this is a good example of, we never know what part of a story is going to be useful for us as we're working with clients. We never know if it's going to be their origin story, how they got into their profession, or something that they did when they were 12 and that paved the way for what they do today. And then also, if their early experiences don't clearly relate to their current goals, how are we going to work them into the story? That's a problem. Sometimes you have someone with a really interesting background, but it doesn't connect to what they want to do now. So you don't want to get off track. We're not telling stories simply to be entertaining. We're telling stories so that people will understand our client's value in the workplace, basically, because we're in the career field. So in this particular case, this client of mine was an Olympic athlete in the Winter Olympics, but that had been 20 years ago when she was much younger. And was doing nothing related to athletics now. And yet, I mean, with that kind of a background, how can you ignore that, right? So what does that show about her? So by asking those early questions and finding out what she was all about, why she did what she did, how she got to the peak of, athletic excellence, and how she moved on from there, and understanding her career progression, we were able to create a thread and connect it to her innate traits and strengths that she's going to use in every job in every area of her life. So starting off with something that is startling and interesting and unique to her, Olympic athlete to KPMG consultant to sommelier and wine educator, that's her journey. And then the rest of the story kind of walks us through what those have in common. Because if you just read those, you would think this person is all over the map. She doesn't know what she wants to do, but that is absolutely not true. So we can use the stories to tie together the threads throughout the background, and then continue on and give more rich detail that illustrates that journey and those qualities, and that make her look like someone who has demonstrated a lot of consistency despite a lot of career variety. So by the point I want to make about that is we don't know. So we have to ask. We have to get under the hood and really ask a lot of questions of our clients about, how did you get here? What was behind that? Why did you do that? How did you get into your field? Because if we don't ask those questions, we're not going to have any stories to tell. We're going to have only the facts of their career progression, and that's not enough. So learning to ask questions and digging deep for a good connection is really going to help us as we work with the clients to figure out what we want to pull from a rich, long background to highlight in a very brief, in this case, 2,000 characters. So it's a challenge, and our job is to figure out, to get the information, and then to figure out what makes sense to tie it all together.
Yeah, and I love, if I could just quickly jump in here. I love how you tied it all up together at the end, at the last two paragraphs. I love it. At that question, how did this all happen? How did this all spring from me being a bobsledder? And then she makes them understand how this all fits, or rather you have made them understand how this all fits. She's not making them work for it. She's getting them super interested in the story. And then she's saying, and this is why you should care about this, which I think is just a genius way to end it.
Right, because you do have to connect the dots for the reader. You have to make them see, because they're not necessarily going to understand those connections unless we point them out. So starting with it and closing it makes a nice bookend.
Yeah, and that deliver another championship performance is a great bookend.
That's the power of words.
Yeah.
Well, you have to tie the things together or it doesn't work. You have to share how it has that connection to what they're going to do. I often tell the story of a student that applied to the graduate program in mechanical engineering when I was doing the graduate program admissions. And they had told the story of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so the beginning of the essay was about this peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and the end was about the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But they didn't tie the connections to the dots quick enough, because the professor that was reviewing the applications read the first and the last paragraph and handed it back to me and said, Marie, this is about a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Why did you give me this candidate? Said, no, you actually have to read the middle. But we have to be always aware, as you're saying, Louise, of the strategic connection of the story, not just that it's a great story. Anyone can tell a good story, but if it doesn't connect to the audience, it doesn't matter. And I've sat in presentations, I'm sure you have as well, where there's a great storyteller up on the stage, but you're kind of wondering, like, what does this mean for me? Or maybe it actually sounds really self-serving because it doesn't connect to why you're in the audience.
Right. And you bring up another good point, Marie, in that from how we write, from a technical standpoint, we have to write in short bursts of information. We can't write a great story in a big chunky paragraph because we know so many people are just not going to read that. So if we don't give them a little bit at a time and kind of encourage them along, and that's a technical how we write. That's something we as writers need to know how to do, because otherwise the great story is going to get lost in the sea of text, and that would just be a shame.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you get confused about it or whatever, just look at any compelling, web copy. It one or two sentences at the most, and then white space. And a lot of times it's in larger text, and it's designed to bring your eye down in that kind of, is it F or S? I can never remember, but it's designed to help the reader actually read, not get lost in paragraph, line after line after line. Nobody's used to reading that way anymore.
Well, and that's the point that I made in my LinkedIn post earlier today, was about the story also has to have some kind of, I call it sex appeal, right? It's going to have some challenge, some context. What made this difficult? What was the transformation of the client? And that's one of the things that both of you do so well, is figure out how to work in that context and the intrigue in the story. But you still got to keep it short and condensed, which is a challenge for us when we're writing a resume or a LinkedIn profile.
It is.
And we also need to respond to the client's style and preferences.
Right.
I had a client get back to me today, and he loved the profile that I wrote for him, but he thought parts of it were a little too breezy for him. He wanted a little bit more structured, so which is fine. I'll be happy to make some edits. But I think I'm glad that he said that, because I wouldn't want him to feel like it wasn't him. So I'm going to tighten up make the language a little more corporate in a few places, just to make him feel more comfortable with it, because that's important too. They absolutely have to own that profile, or that story, that letter, that bio, whatever we're writing for them, so that they feel that it's genuinely them when they put it out into the world. Otherwise, it'll sit at home and they'll never get used.
It's true. The best thing is when a client says, wow, I could have written this myself, meaning it sounds just like them. And then they say, but I could never write this.
Well, that's one of the examples that we show in class, is one of my clients where I wrote this kind of out and loud story for him. And he said, oh boy, I can't put that on LinkedIn. And so then I show the kind of, after we edit it, we still have the story. It's more comfortable for him. And oftentimes when we're writing in the storytelling language, it is going to challenge the client at first. They're going to have to get a little bit used to it. And we might have to back off the story a little bit. And that's okay, because at least they're still going to have that story in there. Whereas if we start with, W, I say, kick the corporate out. If we start with corporate, we're probably not going to get to a story.
Yeah, it's too much of a kick.
Yeah.
They feel like they got kicked.
Yes.
That's like.
Any last thoughts here on storytelling, or your top tip on how resume writers and coaches can help people get their stories?
Louise? Mine is going to sound very amorphous. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go. Oh, Deb, go.
Okay. Mine's going to sound really amorphous. I could give you all kinds of things, but I've talked about a lot of what I believe in already. I think it's really important when you are interviewing your client to use your intuition and go down those paths that the client may not think about, or may almost be uncomfortable with you going down that path. And just, you're not a therapist. This is not about that, but just say, how did you feel during that time? How did you feel when that was over? Just to kind of try to get their emotional kind of spigots open. And then that helps them express themselves much more genuinely to you.
Yeah, and how did you feel? What did you take pride in? Some of those emotion words can help them dive into that place and get better stories. Thanks, Deb.
You're welcome. How about you, Louise?
I would absolutely agree with that. And that is one of the reasons that I personally, and everyone's different, I personally like to use a combination of a worksheet and an interview, because I want to spend my interview time doing exactly that. How did that feel? What was exciting about that? I want to get into those kinds of conversations. I don't want to be uncovering accomplishments, or some, of course, or details, and spending time on things that, to me, they're facts. So, and I can't go longer than an hour on the phone. I just don't have the stamina for it. So I have to be able to get right into the core, the interesting, the story behind the facts. So for me, that works well. Some of you love long phone calls. Others of you can extrapolate from, detailed worksheets. We all have a different method that works. And I think that is incumbent on us to find what works, to know what questions give us the best results, and to use those with our clients. And we are all going to do it differently, which is a good thing. We don't want to be robots. There's no one formula for doing any of this.
Yeah, and I'll just add here as we're ending that I've put the website up for our Storyteller program, but also on the Resume Writing Academy website, there's a link that says, resources. And then below the menu, on the menu below that resources link, you'll find the Resume Writer's Secret Room. And there's a whole bunch of questions in there for different types of careers. On that resources page, there's also a questionnaire that you can use in your work to do just what Louise is talking about and get the stories, get better content. To me, that's what really transforms a resume from what someone does themselves into what I help them do, is that content that most people are uncomfortable saying about themselves. I can help them pull it out and put it onto the resume and really tell their story.
Yeah.
So
do we have time for one more tip, Marie?
Yeah,
really important that it's phenomenal about storytelling. If you're working with people who are not revenue producers, who it's hard to be able to say, what dotted line or straight line led right to them and backwards to that accomplishment. If it's someone who can't really say how they affect the bottom line, storytelling is a great way to show how they do what they do and why their work matters. And it's really very powerful for them because they see themselves in a new light. So we like to say that storytelling really works for everyone, but especially in those cases where it's been really hard to be able to help people understand and talk about their value.
Excellent. I have one more tip that I just thought of too. This may be a small bright spot in our current pandemic situation. Everyone is going to have a story about how they dealt with this situation. Yeah. And that is a great question to ask. What did you do? How did you adjust to working from home? What did you do when you lost your job? What did you have to do at your company to help manage through it? So those are probably things that are going to be fresh in people's minds, and a good way to start with the questions if this is kind of new to you in terms of asking them about these backstory and why. I think they're going to have a story about this because we all will.
Absolutely.
Well, and then you bring in the strategic part. I was just talking about this to somebody yesterday, I think, and all the days blend together. But that if you're staying at home and you're homeschooling your kids, or while you're working, you're doing that, think about the pieces that connect the dots. So the new technologies you've had to learn, now you're teaching somebody else technology, all of those work-related skills that, especially in an interview, if someone has been unemployed for this time, how can they share what they've learned that will connect the dots and not just be a story, but a strategic narrative? Exactly. So thank you, Louise and Deb, for sharing your insights. And we'll be back here actually next week during this same time. We're going to have Susan Critton on to talk about personal branding. And of course, if you're interested, you can join Deb and Louise and I. We're starting next Tuesday with the storytelling class. So thank you both.
Looking forward to that. It's always a great time.
Yes, you do.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.